My name is Dustin Pickering, and I am a poet in Houston, Texas, and I was prompted by the student in India named Studi Shri to talk about eco-poetics, and I want to use an example of eco-poetics by Denise Levertov, a poem called To the Reader, which I will read at the end of my short lecture here. Ecopoetics began with an essay called Literature and Ecology, an Experiment in Ecocriticism in the year 1978 by William Ruckert. And the goal was to shift the attention due to environmentalism and so forth, to shift the attention from an anthropocentric worldview to more of a symbiotic and holistic worldview relating with man's relation to nature, humankind's relation to nature, and it's resulted in something called deep ecology, which is exactly that, interconnectedness and the symbiotic and holistic worldview instead of an anthropocentric worldview, and became something called a new term known as biocentrism, which put Earth first, which is an actual name of an organization. And so consciousness evolves in terms of literature to an Earth-centered discussion rather so much than humankind. Nature is seen as a part of the whole, and we're part of nature rather than us being the caregivers of nature or something of that nature, where we're more actually a part of the environment, and the environment is the focus. And so there becomes questions like how does our representation of nature in literature affect our relationship with it? And the idea there is that culture and ecology are intricately bound to one another in understanding. And so basically the definition of ecocriticism is how we apply ecology and its various disciplines and ecological concepts to the study of literature. And that's the basic cut and dry definition. It has to do a lot with, you can look at various books. Let's take, for example, Quake by Wurlitzer is his name, and it begins with an earthquake in Los Angeles. It's a huge earthquake, and he takes this point of reference and uses it to develop a plot where human emotions unravel, various conflicts are resolved through the fear that's invoked by the earthquake, and we see how this kind of actually is a catharsis for that civilization. And so that's one thing, and that's one aspect that you can look at for ecocriticism, is how this earthquake particularly affects the community or the civilization at large that it inhabits, that it happens in. And so you have that, and another example could be there's Toynbee, Arnold Toynbee, writes about in his book A Study of History about how catastrophes can create adversity within a civilization and actually develop the species or the human species and push them a little further culturally outside of the bounds that they're used to, and make them develop culturally and in terms of intelligence, in terms of creating new civilizations and new cultures. And he goes into some pretty good details about in Study of History about studies of looking at particular civilizations and their environment and the race factors, and showing that that's not a complete picture. The environment, he seems to indicate, does in fact have seems more likely an impetus to civilization's growth, but he specifically mentioned something called these catastrophes and adversities that can happen that develop civilizations, and sort of creates a situation where people have to really think to survive, and so they develop in terms of in those capacities. And now I'm going to take this poem, which I'm going to read, by Denise Levertov, called "To the Reader," and it's in my opinion, it's this was before the essay that I mentioned that was published in 1978. This poem was much older than that. It was about 10-15 years older than that, and I think it's an excellent example of eco-criticism, and I'll explain why. It's called "To the Reader." As you read, a white bear leisurely pees, dyeing the snow saffron. And as you read, many gods lie among lianas. Eyes of obsidian are watching the generations of leaves. And as you read, the sea is turning its dark pages, turning its dark pages. Now, the reason I think this is a really expert poem in terms of eco-criticism and eco-poetics is because, number one, it begins with, you're addressing the reader. But what it does is it directs your attention to this white bear, and what this white bear is doing is peeing. And as you see the orientation of the poem, immediately you're thinking of the bear instead of yourself as the reader, or instead of the poem even itself. So you're questioning the environment in terms of this bear and its perspective, and so it shifts your attention from the anthropocentric idea of the reader to the bear, which is part of nature. And then it moves into a kind of interesting pun. As you read, many lie among the lianas, and they're watching generations of leaves. Well, the leaves obviously you're referring to like leaves of a flower or a tree or something of that nature. And what's actually, there's a pun, as in leaves of a page of the page of the book. So now you're questioning, if you're thinking in terms of following this poem, you're thinking in terms of how am I as a reader affecting the environment. So it becomes very self-critical, which is an aspect of eco-poetics, is to question even the role of the poet or of the writer in creating poetry, and how that affects the ecology at large. And then what it goes into, and this is the masterful aspect of this poem, is how circular it goes from the white bear leisurely peeing to these dark pages of the sea. And so you kind of think about the interconnectedness of this bear and what it's doing, and the sea, because those are both liquid forms, and how this the reader is drawn from point A with the "To the Reader" is the title. You're addressing the reader, but you address the reader in terms of what's going on in this environment, and there's a lot of puns being made and a lot of directive approach to this poem, where it goes from the bear peeing to the waters of the sea, and then you would leave this almost apocalyptic note, dark pages, which can imply the ink of the poem, reading it because it's dark print, but it could also imply darkness as in judgment of God, or dark as in foreboding, or any number of other kinds of darknesses that that could be seen as in some sense sinister, as in apocalyptic. So you're led from this very simple thing of a white bear simply doing its business on the ground, to the dark pages of the sea. And so it goes from almost like an innocence of nature to this this foreboding sense of what are we doing here? You're led to almost like look at yourself self-critically and think, I'm sitting here reading this poem while apocalypse is going on outside, and I'm not even aware of this. And so it's a masterful poem by Denise Levertov, and that's basically how I see how that poem works into ecocriticism. And anyway, that's my take of about 10 minutes worth of me lecturing on ecocriticism. Just remember to check out William Rueckert, that's Rueckert, Literature and Ecology, an Experiment in Ecocriticism. And like I said, the main thing, the central definition is applying the ecology and concepts dealing with the ecology to the study of literature. And ecology is roughly nature and interconnectedness of creatures within nature and the earth as the central motif. Thank you, and have a nice day.